afternoon, good evening. This is Jodi with All True Crime. And tonight we'll be doing short, scary stories by one of my favorite authors, Michael Kelso. Fragments of Fear, Volume 2. Hope you all are doing well, and if you like this kind of content, please do not forget to subscribe to my channel. It does it so much good. And don't forget to like tonight will be a soft spoken reading instead of whispering only. So tonight we're going to be reading The Journey. The Journey. By Michael Kelso, and I will leave all this information there for you to check him out on social media accounts. He's an excellent writer. Please check him out. So chapter 1, on the journey. Billows of steam rose from the iron giant like breath from the nostrils of a warhorse, chomping at the bit on a cold battlefield. The steam encompassed the great beast in a surreal mist, as though protecting it from the ravages of time. The station was deserted, as if no one wanted to approach the beast for fear it would rouse in wrath. Slowly a shadow formed. At first they seemed bonded to mist and shadow. Then the darkness darkness drifted closer and coalesced into the shape of a man. A trick of the light? I never knew. But he seemed to be wearing a hooded cloak, dark as midnight. As he drew near, I saw it was merely a hat and uniform. He walked slowly, gazing at this great ice monster, as lovingly as a rider checks his faithful steed before a long journey. His gaze seemed to pierce even metal, looking for any blemish, any imperfection. This slow, methodical inspection continued over the length of the train's passenger, dining, and sleeper car, ending where it began at the engine. He mounted the steps, headed for the control room. The dials and instruments were subjected to his scrutiny. Finally, his gaze settled on the firebox. His eyes seemed to glow as the intense heat turned his sunken cheeks from white to orange. His normally impassive face gave way to the slightest of grins. The conductor greeted the passengers as they arrived, helped them aboard until all were accounted for, save one. The whistle sounded its final warning. The iron behemoth had belched smoke as it muscled its load away from the station. The journey had begun. The train moved steadily down the tracks. Its swaying and clickety-clack sound had lulled many passengers to sleep, but not the conductor. He sat in a comfortable chair, eyes closed, but not asleep. To look at him, you would not know how he did this job at all. To call him ancient would be an understatement. His steel-gray hair, thin white face, and emaciated body made him look as though he belonged in a pine box rather than collecting tolls on a train that was nearly quarter-mile long. Suddenly his eyes snapped open and stared at the antique wall clock. Just as it struck midnight, he rose quickly, put on his conductor's cap, and left the room. The conductor stepped through the door into the passenger's car. It was richly decorated with beautiful dark red carpet, which perfectly offset the golden fringes and accents of the room. The seats were designed in classic style. 2 seats faced each other with a small table in between. Outside, darkness had fallen like a blanket, covering the countryside in its embrace. Most of the passengers quickly grew tired of staring out into the inky black abyss. Conversations had been consummated between strangers and had given birth to stories lovingly shared. The conductor slightly glided up behind the first passenger and paused as the man began to weave a tale. Chapter 2. She staggered awkwardly down the empty street, not really knowing where she was going. With one arm, she clutched the wound on her side. The other arm was outstretched in front of her, as though searching for something. Never looking back, always moving slowly forward. On and on she trudged, tireless, relentlessly looking for something, but not knowing what. She only knew it was out there, and had been there before. But when? Where? The empty streets were slowly disappearing through darkness and late evening mist. Nothing moved, except for her. Even the air seemed still. Deserted cars, half-destroyed buildings, and rubble were her only companions, and still she kept going on. Reason and blame, or this thing from her mind, the beginning did not matter. Now was all that mattered. The few streetlights that still worked flickered to life. They gave her a dim, somewhat eerie view of her surroundings, but there was nothing she wanted to see. It was not there. So on she went with her endless search. All around was evidence of chaos and destruction, yet she was not afraid. How many days or weeks had she been silently walking, and she did not feel tired? All that mattered was a search. Whatever it was, she knew somehow that she had to have it. Had something caught her eye? Or had her fevered brain began to hallucinate? She scanned the ruined landscape. There it was again. Movement. Her pace quickened. The silhouette of a moving human form stirred a feeling she had not felt in a long time. But what was this feeling? Joy at finding another living person? Fear of what they might do to her? No, those were not it. The feeling grew stronger with every step she took. Finally, she recognized it. It was hunger. She steadily approached, mere steps away, when the man turned towards her with a look of shock etched into his face. She realized that her search was over. Not remembering the last time she had spoke, the sound coming from her throat was more like a feral growl, struggling as though the lining from her mind to her mouth had been damaged. The words she had waited so long to say attempted to escape her lips. She looked at him in the eyes and said with a raspy voice, "Brains. Brains." She lunged at him before his shock wore off. He reached for the gun on his side, but her inhuman strength was too much. She ripped his arm off his cast it aside like a candy wrapper, then pulled his skull apart and started eating while she was still screaming, "Brains!" The body lay lifeless on the ground. She rose from gorging herself and started walking. Never once did she look back at that shell of a man she had just torn to shreds. She staggered awkwardly down the street, not really knowing where she was going. After the man had finished his story, the conductor softly cleared his throat. The storyteller whipped his head around quickly. For just an instant, he thought he saw a skeletal hand outstretched towards him, with bones as white as ivory blinking hard to clear his head. He looked again and saw merely the milky white hand of the conductor beckoning for their tickets. "Oh, pardon me, sir," the conductor said. "I didn't mean to startle you." "I wasn't startled," the man said. "I just thought I saw..." "Yes?" the conductor said expectantly. "Nothing," the man said, mentally shaking himself. The conductor punched the tickets of the 4 passengers and began to move on, and then paused. "I hope you don't think it's too forward of me, but I collect stories, and I was intrigued by yours." Thanks. Would you mind if I wrote it down in one of my journals?" "Well, the thing is, man, it's not actually my story. I just told it." "And why did you tell that particular story?" "I don't know." He said thoughtfully. "It just seemed appropriate somehow." "They say the eyes are the windows to the soul, but I have found that to be false. I believe that the stories one tells hold much more insight into the true feelings," the conductor said with a knowing smile. "So may I collect it?" "Look, I'll make you a deal. I'll tell you a riddle. If you can guess it, you can collect my story. If you don't, I get to ride for free." The conductor rubbed his pale chin thoroughly. What's the deal? Oh, okay, the man said, rubbing his hands together. All right, a cowboy rides into town on Friday, stays 3 days, and leaves on Friday. How did he do it? The conductor smiled. My dear sir, you take me for a fool. I thought you were going to offer me a challenge. All right, smart guy, well, what's the answer? The horse's name is Friday. The man's face fell. You're the only person who ever got that riddle. The conductor merely smiled. Just one question. What is your profession? Biochemical engineering. Why? He said. No reason. The conductor said, moving on to the other passengers. I was just thinking about your story. Hey, hold on there, fella, said the man seated across from the storyteller. Ain't you going to write this story down? Yes, when I've finished my duties. You won't forget it by then. No, the conductor smiled. I have what's it called? A didactic memory. It helps in my line of work. A what? An electric memory. Didactic. You would know it as a photographic memory. Oh, what good is an electric memory on a train? You'd be amazed, said the conductor. Well then, if you think the story was good, you'll love this one. The conductor turned and faced the man with rapt attention. It goes like this, he began. Chapter 3. Poor Harold. Harold was not having a good day. With little hot water he usually had for a shower was already used by another tenant in the undersized, overpriced, rodent-infested apartment building he lived in. So yet again he took an ice-cold shower. The shower must have felt sorry for him and somehow told the toaster to make it up to him. The toaster obliged by giving him a little extra heat and burning his last piece of toast. Harold choked down the burnt toast and washed it down with a half cup of cold coffee. As he stumbled out of the door, turning to dress himself, he barely made it to the bus stop in time. Sat down, hoping that his luck would change, when a spring from the seat broke and shot up into his leg. It didn't hurt him. The real problem was, when he stood up, the spring caught hold of his pants and ripped a large hole in them. The rest of the way to the office, he had to cover the back of his pants with his tattered briefcase. In the elevator, on the way up to his office, he heard snickers from behind him and stopped when he turned around. He got off at his floor and quickly made his way to his cubicle. That was barely big enough to fit his tiny desk. He collapsed into the chair and let out a long sigh. Harold was not having a good day. In fact, Harold was not having a good life. He just couldn't seem to catch a break. He was never popular in school, but he always made decent grades, usually just missing the honor roll. When he was in 9th grade, his father passed away, leaving him to take care of his mother. She had Alzheimer's disease that got progressively worse. Some days Harold would come home just to be chased off by his mother, who thought he was a burglar. On good days, she chased him back with a stick. On bad days, a shotgun. His mother passed away just before he graduated high school. Yeah, the house was left to Harold, but the mortgage still had 10 years left to pay it off, and Harold could not afford the payments, sold the house, and he had just enough money left for a down payment on his pitifully small apartment. He wanted to go to law school but couldn't afford it, so he got a job as a clerk for a low-grade law firm, which was essentially a bunch of ambulance chasers. He hoped that he could get some practical experience studying for the bar and maybe move up to middle management in the meantime. 6 years later, Harold still sat in the same tiny cubicle. His computer was so out of date he couldn't even run the internet. His chair and desk were falling apart. The one button on his phone hadn't worked in nearly 2 weeks. He had tried to call maintenance, but their extension number was 221, and every time he went past their door, a sign was hanging on it saying, "On break." Damn. While trying to decide what to do to his phone rang. "Harold Funston, how can I help you?" he said. "Funston," his boss shouted. Harold jumped, nearly dropping the phone. "Yes, sir." "Where's my report?" he growled. Harold floundered. What report, sir?" Hello, the one I needed done 2 days ago on last month's profit-loss margin." "Sir, you never asked me to do a report." "I left you 3 voicemails in the last week. But, sir, my phone is—" "I don't want to hear your excuses. Have the report on my desk in an hour or you're fired." Harold was so upset he dropped the receiver, comically juggling it all the way to the floor. He hung the phone up and frantically began gathering information to start his report. As much as he hated his job, losing it would be catastrophic. He was already living paycheck to paycheck and falling behind on bills. Soon, he'd had to get another crappy job on top of his crappy job he already had, just to afford living in that crummy apartment. His only glimmer of hope was a faded postcard he kept by his computer showing a beautiful tropical beach. The phone rang again. He picked it up while continuing to type. "Harold Funston, how can I help you?" "You have just won $5 million, proclaimed an automated voice. Harold's jaw hit the desk. It was the miracle he had been waiting for. He looked at his picture and started to dream of diving into the clear blue ocean. He was brought back to reality by the voice on the phone. "The Acme Prize Corporation has selected you as its grand prize winner. You need only to confirm your name, address, and claim your prize. If you do not confirm, we will pick another lucky winner." Harold was drooling. He knew that from now on everything was going to be amazing. "To confirm your prize, simply press 1 and an operator will assist you." Shit. Harold stared at his phone in disbelief. "You gotta be kidding me." He started hammering on the one button like it was playing a video game in the desperate hope that the button might register just one time. "Please, press 1 to confirm," the voice repeated. One, he screamed into the phone at a last desperate act. "I'm sorry, we did not recognize your response. Better luck next time." The line disconnected. "An equally entertaining story, sir," the conductor said. "May I collect it?" "Sure," the man said, eyeing the conductor cautiously. As long as you don't go getting rich off in it behind my back." No need to worry, Mr. Jordan," the conductor said. "I collect these stories only for myself." All right, let's shake on it, man," the man said, grasping the conductor's hand. Instantly, shock spread across the man's face as he quickly released his grip. "Oh, my apologies, sir," said the conductor. I have poor circulation." The conductor moved to the next passengers, leaving the man to stare at his hand. "Yo, man, what's wrong?" his friend asked. "I don't know. I felt as if his hand was made of solid ice." "How did he know your name?" the other passenger asked slowly. The woman who sat behind him smiled and shook her head. "It's on the ticket he just punched." The conductor ambled up to the next passenger. She was an elderly woman, tall and thin, who wore a black dress and functional shoes. She sat alone, straight as an arrow in her seat. She seemed to sense that someone was approaching, even though the conductor moved, as silent as a grave. "Excuse me, sir," she said. "Has anyone turned in a large King James Bible to Lost and Found?" "No, ma'am," the conductor said. "Did you lose one?" "Well, yes," she said. "I always take it with me on long trips. And now I think about it, My purse is missing, too. Nothing has shown up, ma'am. Are you sure you brought it with you? I'm positive, she said. At least I think I'm positive. I'm pretty sure. She trailed off. The conductor smiled a knowing smile. I will look for them with all diligence, he said. In the meantime, may I have your ticket? Oh, of course, she said, handing the ticket to him. I'm sorry, sir. You must get so tired of the silly ramblings of an old woman. No, not at all, he said sincerely. In fact, I enjoy hearing a good story. Do you have any? Oh, none of my stories are good enough to tell, she said. Oh, you're just being modest, the conductor said with a sly grin. Well, she said, starting to blush, I do have one. As they say, I'm all ears. Chapter 4. The Invisible. Spare change, mister? Got a quarter, ma'am? Hey, kid, give me a dime. No one pays attention, not even a glance in his direction. Occasionally someone drops a coin or two, more out of habit than wanting to help. He is one of the invisible. They hide in plain sight. No one knows their name, and no one cares. They are an inconvenience at best. He walks out of the terminal. After a day of begging, it vanishes. No one notices because they didn't see him in the first place. He walks down a filthy alleyway and stops at a graffiti-covered door. He opens it into an immaculate room in contrast to the alley. Quickly closes the door. It is a room that only they know about. Yo, how was your day? He is greeted. Success. In his somewhat surprising response, he holds out his hand to show $1.55 in coins. That's wonderful, the other is saying. Sincerely. He closes his eyes, grips the money tight, and speaks so low it's almost inaudible. Yet some of the words can be heard through fervent whispers. Bless, help, protect, giver. Bless, help, protect, giver. Our view, his counterpart, also closes his eyes and whispers, bless, help, protect, giver. When they are done, they end with a single word. He opens his hand and the money is glowing as though it is made of light. The other smiles at him as he gently, evenly, reverently places the glowing coins into a large bowl that is full of glowing coins. Come, the other said, we have much to do. Hector Jimenez has stood in the same spot every day for the last 5 years waiting for the bus. It's become such a habit that it's a comfort thing now, just part of his daily routine. If he isn't in that spot when the bus comes, he just doesn't feel right. He's been the same for 5 years. Same wife, same job, same kids. The sameness is both a blessing and a curse. He wants to try something different. There have been attractive women on the bus for 5 years, but the others always ignore them. He's happy at home. But lately, women seem to be more attractive, and he's starting to notice. He's starting to make his way closer to a gorgeous blonde. Some Jamaican Rastafarian wannabe steps in between them. He has a multicolored hat, dreadlocks complete with lice that Hector could see. He doesn't seem to care much for personal hygiene either. This is the first time in 5 years that Hector is tempted to move from his spot. Instead, he takes a step back and reads his newspaper, trying to ignore him. In fact, he's so involved in reading his paper that he does not see the out-of-control car careening towards the bus stop. The other people scatter, but Hector is a split second too late. As realization dawns on him, he tries to get out of the way, but knows it's futile. The car is a mere feet from him. Suddenly he feels a strong hand push him clear of the careening car. He lands on the sidewalk several feet away. The car strikes a building and stops its unintentional rampage. Lots of damage is done, but it seems that no one is hurt, except... Hector looks back to where he had just been standing, and there lays the Jamaican wannabe. His unmoving body was twisted and bleeding. Oh no, 5 people already had their cell phones out calling 911. An ambulance arrives in 7 minutes, and the Jamaican is taken away. Hector tries to say something, tries to thank him, but he's unconscious. Hector watches as the ambulance speeds away. He doesn't know that it will not arrive at any hospital. Several blocks over from where Hector is reevaluating his life stands 15-year-old Alan Decker. Alan isn't a bad kid or a stupid kid. He just isn't very popular. He fell in some with, kids that took advantage of him, but he allowed it to become... He wanted to belong. Now, where he is, standing in the corner on 23rd Street, trying to build up the nerve to rob the place and to make the worst mistake of his young life. He doesn't need the money. Nah, not that. He'll get much more here anyway. He isn't interested in thrill. He's nearly peeing his pants in fear now. So why is he doing this? Because his so-called friends dared him. They gave him a gun, sent him off to the store. He walks towards the register, knowing if he doesn't do this now, he might not build up the nerve at all. Just before he gets to the counter, a man in a ski mask runs in, points a gun at the clerk, and screams, "Money now!" Alan stops short. The robber turns and looks at him. "What are you doing? Get on the floor." When the robber turns back, he's looking down at the barrel of a sawed-off shotgun. He tries to pull his gun up first, but it's too slow. The shotgun goes off, unloading both barrels of buckshots into the robber's chest and throwing him backward. The robber lands in a bloody heap beside Alan. He watches as the light fades from the man's eyes. The ambulance driver doesn't even bother with CPR. It's already too late. Alan watches the EMT cover the robber's face and load him into the ambulance, knowing full well that it could have been his face being covered right now. He throws the gun in the river and never talks to those friends again. The ambulance driver, by reminding him that he has made the right decision. This ambulance also never reaches the hospital. A little later, while the Jamaican and the robber quietly sneak into the same well-kept room they left that very morning, their bodies begin to glow so brightly as to blind anyone who might happen across them. When the glow faded and the two are once again dressed as beggars, they smile at each other and close the door behind them on their way back to the terminal. As the woman finishes the story, she notices the conductor did not seem happy. In fact, he seemed downright irritated. "Oh, whatever is wrong? Did you not like my story?" The conductor turned slowly and glared at her with a fire of rage in his eyes. He looked chilled her to the bone, and suddenly he seemed to regain his composure. "My apologies," he said. "Your story was nice. It just reminded me of time when someone took something from me." "Oh dear," she said. I didn't mean to upset you." His face softened, and he smiled in spite of himself. "Oh, dear soul," he said. "No need to fret. Thank you for being willing to tell me your story." Then he moved quickly to the other passengers. Chapter 5. Emily stood alone in the darkness. Her only source of light was an antique gas-powdered street lamp. She couldn't remember how long she had stood there, or why. Somewhere deep in her mind, she knew she had no choice. What is this place? The lamp had become important to her. It was the only companion. In fact, it was the only light in the desolate place. It was her protector, her shining knight, holding the horrid creatures at bay that she imagined lived in this darkness. This place seemed familiar, like some half-remembered nightmare from long ago. Emily was sure that she had been here before, and thought still gave her chills. The light also provided her sound. The occasional flicker of the flame burned the wick, and a subtle hiss of gas was all she heard in the deafening silence. There was no night sounds in this place. No crickets chirped, no owls hooted, no distant, mournful wails of a wolf. The thundering of her heart and the rustling wind of her breath were all she heard. What was that? She frantically searched for the source of this new sound. A train. Finally, a pinprick of light emerged, getting closer, getting stronger. Soon she could hear the chuff-chuff of the approaching engine. She knew it was coming for her. All at once she felt the excitement, the exhilaration of a trip to the unknown. Just as quickly, fear settled into her mind. New horrors would the train hold. But most of all, she didn't want to leave her lamp, her protector, her friend. As the train slowed, the massive engine lumbered by, followed by the first few cars. She had fought with herself and decided to stay at the station, and no one will change my mind. The train came to a stop as she stood, arms folded, resolute. She refused to leave. As the engine blew off its excessive steam, a strange wind whipped around the platform. It grabbed the steam and carried it toward the lamp, smothering the flame and casting everything into darkness. Emily's heart leapt into her throat. It was all she could do to scream. Panic washed over her like an ocean wave. Just when she thought she couldn't stand it, a light appeared. She was so overjoyed she ran to it. Any light had to be better than this soul-crushing darkness. She approached this new light with a sense of dread. Some tall, thin old man in a uniform was holding up a lantern. She was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. She paused when she reached him, but he held out his hand and said, "Come along now, child." He sounded so much like her grandfather that she took his hand without hesitation and followed him into the train. He led her to an empty seat, punched her ticket, and turned to leave. "Excuse me," Emily said, making a pause. You seem familiar. Do I know you?" "Oh, that's quite possible, young lady. You seem somewhat familiar to me as well." Could I trouble you for your name?" she said. "No trouble at all," he said. "My name is..." But the words were drowned out by the blowing whistle as the train lurched forward, starting down the rails again. "Now, if you excuse me, I have other passengers to attend to," the conductor said, then continued punching tickets. After his duty was done, the conductor sat in a room that seemed much larger than the size of a train car. There were no decorations, no windows, only bookshelves. Floor to ceiling, the walls were covered with little bookshelves. On the shelves were thousands of large books. Each one looked identical to the other. There were no markings on them, no title, no author, only a number. The conductor sat at his desk, writing the latest story in his newest edition. He finished, then sat back to review his work. He was restless, and he knew exactly why. The last passenger, Emily, was one of those passengers. Every once in a while, he would get one. He knew them immediately, even though they had no idea that they were different. He tried to treat them no differently than the other fare, but personal feelings sometimes crept in. He made a mental note to treat her the same, but a subtle feeling was crawling around in the back of his mind. It wasn't quite fear, but maybe trepidation. She had done it to him before, and even though he was certain he had her this time, doubt clawed at him with a hungry predator. Not needing to clear his mind, he put away the current book and put out one that seemed more worn than the others. It automatically fell upon a certain page, and it had an innumerable times before. He sat back in his chair, reread his favorite tale. Chapter 6. Instant cereal. Smoke poured from the superheated barrels of his powerful handguns, brass casting covered the floor, laying in pools of blood. Dead bodies lay there, littering the little rooms like a trash at a rock concert. The man slowly lowered the empty weapons and sighed deeply and calmly, walking out the door. One down, he thought, with a twisted grin as he reloaded. He stepped over the bodies and headed toward the main hallway, but found the door locked. He turned back into the room, searching for something. Leaned down and took the eyes from a guard's lifeless body. "Thanks, Leonard," he said to the corpse. He unlocked the door and glanced into the hallway, first shooting out the security cameras. He had done before. Walking down the hall, he unlocked another door into a full room of people in orange clothes. The guns opened up. Time slowed. Bodies fell. The thump of bullets slamming into flesh and bone and the horrified screaming satisfied him immensely. He went diligently from cell to cell, making sure he did not miss anyone, even checking under bunks. When he was sure that no living person remained, he reloaded and moved on to the next room. On he went with his possessed rampage, leaving a bloody trail behind him. Finally satisfied with his macabre tour de force, he holstered his weapons and climbed up to his escape hatch. He slipped into the shadows, leaving behind him no reason for the carnage. His thoughts now were only on escape. He stood at the edge of the roof, trying to find a way down, when one policeman saw him, then another. They pointed their guns at him, and he started yelling. Then, with a flash, he was jolted awake. Larry Bram opened his eyes in shock. He was momentarily disoriented, couldn't recall where he was, remembering his bedroom and the dream he just had. He thought, "Oh, this seems so real." Looking over at the clock, he realized that he'd overslept. It's time to get ready for work. Back to the grind again, he said. Almost disappointed about his grim fantasy had been only that. The people he had to deal with on his job becomes his main source of stress. As he drove to work, he turned up his favorite song, Jeremy by Pearl Jam, and screamed the lyrics at the top of his lungs as the CD played. He rounded the corner to the main entrance and was met by a sight that he would never have guessed. No, this can't be. Ambulances lined the front walkway. Police cars surrounded the building. The prison itself is alive with activity, with emergency workers going in and out like bees in a hive. As he pulled into his parking spot, he could see bodies laying on the ground, neatly placed in rows, like they were being set out for spring cleaning. Each one was covered head to toe by a black plastic bag, but a few had an arm or leg sticking out enough to see a blood-stained orange inmate uniform or Gray's officer uniform. He walked up to a policeman. "Excuse me, I work here. What happened?" But the officer was too busy and just ignored him. He noticed some corrections officers from another shift standing, watching it all go on. He tried to talk to them, but they were in shock and didn't say anything. "Hey, you!" A tall, good-looking officer yelled to him. "The boss wanted me to get somebody and go inside to see how bad the cops are messing things up." "All right," Larry said slowly. They made their way inside. It was beyond his worst nightmare. Everywhere he looked, there were shell casings, bodies, bloody floors, and bullet holes. "Wow, what a mess," the officer said. The crime lab photographer, who was still taking pictures of everything, aimed right at him and snapped a picture. "Hey, man, what was that for?" he said, and stared after her. The officer grabbed his arm. "Don't worry about it. She's just doing her job." "What?" He looked suspiciously at her, but walked away as she continued taking pictures as though he wasn't there. They walked into the control unit where blood and bullet holes littered the control panels. Suddenly, a vision of his hand holding the gun, blasting the holes in the panels and the officers that had been posted there. He blinked his eyes and the vision passed, but he was now breathing hard. "Yeah, sometimes a scene like this will do that to you," said the officer. "Do what?" "Knock the wind right out of you from shock." Larry eyed the officer with suspicion. I don't think I ever got your name, and I don't recognize you. Oh, I've been here for a while, I said. It's a cryptic smile that he had. You just don't notice me until recently. My name isn't important right now. They walked down a long hallway, and the occasional blood splattered and chipped concrete from a bullet ricochet. Everywhere Larry looked, he got the feeling of deja vu. Each room he entered seemed like he pictured in his mind exactly what it would look like, down to the position of the shell casings on the floor. Twice he caught the officer looking at him with an expression he would best describe as amusement, but he looked quickly away and disappeared as soon as Larry spotted it. There's so much blood on the floor, and the investigators, EMTs, and police. He had to be careful where he stepped. In these rooms, they had laid down several plastic tarps to use as walkways so they didn't slip or track the blood all over the building. They entered his cell, and Larry looked at the broken body of a young man he knew from the street, who was only in jail on a misdemeanor, nearly broken down. What kind of person does this sort of thing? Larry asked. Lots of people think about doing it. Correcting the world's injustices is usually how they see it. Most of them lack the conviction, the final push over the edge, or to make them act on it, the officer said. You almost sound like you admire this monster. The officer looked at Larry with a gleam in his eye. You find monsters in the strangest places. Sometimes they don't even know they're doing anything wrong. Almost like it's a dream. Larry's face went pale. I need to get some air, he said. Sure, said the officer. Let's go up to the roof. There were 2 sentries posted near the roof hatch. They just ignored the officers, and coming out of the hatch, Larry and the officer walked in to the far end of the roof. Larry hesitated when he saw yet another body. For some reason, this one was different. The officer called him. Come over, you have to see this. And I've seen enough, Larry said. The officer's voice changed. It lowered and it became menacing. No, you must see this. Without realizing he was doing it, Larry walked over and looked down at the body. His own lifeless eyes stared out at him. Larry stumbled back. Oh my God, no, this can't be. The officer smiled a mirthless smile. Can't be what? Real? His maniacal laugh sounded something like many voices at once. You so-called good citizens are all alike. You love denial. You can deny anything. You denied the truth of this place the whole time we were walking through it. Did any of it seem the least bit familiar? Like, oh, I don't know, maybe a dream? Larry's eyes grew wide with realization. The officer laughed again. You don't even seem to realize that you made this happen. You, Mr. Good Citizen, who should have shown these people compassion at a time in their lives when they needed it most. Instead, you treated them with disdain and hatred. He smiled. I am so proud of you. You held on to your hate so tightly that it drove you to this. I didn't. I couldn't. It was just a dream. Larry stammered. There's that wonderful denial again. Have you ever thought about guessing my name? Look, I don't know who you are. I've never seen you before. I've had many names, some better known than the others. One of my favorites you might recognize is Lucifer. The name hung in the air like an acrid smoke on a calm night. Larry's eyes and mouth grew wide with fear. He stammered, not being able to form any coherent sound. Slowly he worked around until his mind forced his mouth to utter a single word. Why?
Don't ask me, you made it happen. Your hate, your rage, your contempt for those people was felt and unreturned. That made it grow like a weed in your mind until you just couldn't contain it. I live off hate, so I don't mind it one bit. Even gave a little nudge here and there to keep it going. Had you been a really good citizen, you might have been when your actions were heading towards and stopped, but your high, mighty attitude only made people hate you, which made you hate them back. It's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle, Larry said, finally realizing truth. So what happens now? Now, Lucifer said, if your friends are going to take you on a little trip. Instantly, one of the inmates and officers that Larry had brutally murdered appeared and grabbed him. He tried to get away, but there were too many. Larry felt as though the roof of the prison had turned into quicksand as they dragged him further down. He looked through a long tunnel as he continued his rapid descent. Lucifer was looking down at him, laughing. Enjoy the company, he shouted, because you're going to be together a very long time. Chapter 7. The passengers settled in for a long ride. The conversations had died down, and by one of the clickety-clack of the rails lulled them into different levels of unconsciousness. The lights in the passenger car seemed to dim on their own, but no one was alert enough to notice. The conductor stood at the back of the train, leaning on the railing. The wind whipped his steel gray hair as he stared into the inky blackness. What he saw no human eye could tell, but it seemed to please him. He wore a small grin as a raven appeared out of the darkness, caught up with the train, and landed on the rail beside him. "Hello, old friend," said the conductor to the bird. "How's your unkindness?" The raven looked at the man and cocked his head as though pondering the question, then let out a harsh cry. "Really?" the conductor said. "I'm sorry to hear that. Do send her my regards." The bird whistled and clicked his beak. "Me? Oh, I'm fine," he answered, less than truthfully. The bird eyed him dubiously and squawked. "I never could fool you, could I?" he said. "One of them is on board." The bird hopped to the side and peered into the passenger window, chirping. "Yes, it is the young woman on the left, third row up," he said. The bird quickly chirped out a question. "I'm going to go about my normal routine. That's what I'm going to do." The bird clicked its disapproval. "Well, what would you have me do?" the conductor asked. "Accost her in front of the other passengers? Throw her off the train? Neither is going to accomplish our goal." The bird croaked at a question that made the conductor wince ever so slightly. "If it happens again, then it happens," he said. "She can't torment me forever." "Your concern is touching, but we have business to attend to, my friend," the conductor said. "What are the numbers for the day?" The bird emitted a series of chirps and answers, causing the conductor's brow to furrow. "I may have to make an extra trip today," he said, with a sigh of resignation. The raven let out a long, mournful cry. The man looked at him and smiled. "I do appreciate your sympathy, but I knew what I was getting into when I took the job." The bird chirped softly.
I haven't thought much about it. The man said, I suppose I could use a holiday, but who would take my place? You? The bird flapped its wings wildly, screaming and snapping at him. The conductor fended off the playful attack. You're probably right, he said, laughing. You could do a better job than me. The bird was on a roll. He caravolted about the railing, snapping and whistling, beating his feathers against the rail. Okay, calm down, old friend, the man said, chuckling. There's no need for such language. I was just having a joke with you. As the bird settled, suddenly the night air was shattered by a woman's piercing scream. The bird flew off, and the conductor ran inside. When he arrived at the scene, all the passengers were wide awake, and several were crowding around the young woman. She was pale and shaking. What happened? The conductor asked. I don't know. I had this incredibly vivid nightmare, she said, staring at him blankly. Can you tell me about it? He said, inching closer. Really? Now? What are you talking about? One of the other passengers asked. Yes, well, it's still fresh in her mind, he said with a hungry look on his face. I'm not sure, she said. Trust me, the conductor said, taking her hand. Nothing and no one can hurt you here. The coldness of his hand seemed to calm her as she breathed deeply. Well, let's see. It started like this. Chapter 8. The Stranger. I always liked to run. I never really knew why. I wasn't running from anything or towards anything. I was just running. It soothed me. There had been times when I noticed strangers watching me, and these times always brought to mind the same thought. Pervert. For the most part, I ran in my little world. I had earphones in, but the wire just ended in my pocket. It was a great way to avoid any conversation I didn't want to have. Mostly I ran in the morning or evening, before or after work, always relieved of stress. On this particular day, I had to work overtime. I got home late and debated about skipping the run, but the weather was so beautiful. I went even though the sun had set an hour before. Twilight had begun, and the sky was glowing a brilliant red. The scent of the pine trees mixed with the flowers that lined the path always exhilarated me. The park was deserted. I only saw a few people, and all one at a time. The lights had lined the path and just begun to flicker to life. For some reason, the lights comforted me. I could see just fine without them. I felt safe when they were on, though, like nothing could hurt me near the lights. As I ran, I approached a spot of darkness amongst the lights. One of them had burned out. Nothing to worry about. It's just a blown bulb. I tried to convince myself of that, but I failed. Approaching the burned out light, I saw a shadow leaning against the post. It was tall, thin, and dark. I could not make out the face, but his eyes were following me. It wasn't the same as when the others leered at me. I felt no sexual attraction, only fear. I had not been pushing myself hard enough to really sweat, but my heart was pumping now and had nothing to do with exercise. My pace quickened as I passed the stranger in the darkness. Aside from his head, he never moved. My pace slowed just slightly with the return of the light on my path. Just as I was chiding myself for being so stupid, another dark spot inflicted itself on my path. Approaching it, I saw the impossible. The stranger was leaning against that pole as well. Again, he merely watched. I ran even faster, trying to get past this pole. That's not possible. How could he even get here before me? My fear abated, but not as much as the first time. A nagging feeling was settling into the back of my brain. He's following me. I glanced back at the pole, and I could barely make out the stranger's silhouette, still standing against the pole. I nearly fell when I turned back and the approaching lamp was out. Not only that, but the stranger was somehow leaning against it. Cold sweat ran down my back. I broke into a dead run. I was near the end of the path where it ended at a street. Suddenly, my worst fears were realized. The remaining path lights winked out one by one. The stranger leaned against the pole, but was no longer still. He was coming towards me. Somehow I reached deep into myself and found a little bit more speed. Come on, I goaded myself to go faster. Glancing over my shoulder, I could see the stranger gaining on me. My eyes must have been playing tricks on me, because it didn't look like he was running. I don't know, if I had to put a word to it, I would say he was floating. I was running for all I was worth. The street was only 50 feet ahead. I could see the lamp bathing the sidewalk in beautiful light. I redoubled my efforts to reach the safety of the lamp, but my pursuer was gaining on me so fast that I would never make it. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Desperately I clawed at the air, trying anything to move. One iota faster. I could feel his hot breath on my neck. I knew he was just about to. And bam! At first I wasn't sure what happened. I remembered flying through the air. I don't know, landing hard, feeling a snap and incredible pain. I was staring up into the night sky. I could feel something warm running down my cheek and into my eye. I remember feeling helpless. I looked over to see a metal bumper hovering over me. I could not move. I could not speak, but I could just hear fine. I could hear just fine. Shadows surrounded me. I could barely make out what they were saying. Did you see that? She came out of nowhere. Someone call an ambulance. Give her mouth to mouth. How? Her face is smashed in. The voices started to fade away, like someone was turning down the volume of my own hearing. The last thing I saw was the stranger step into the crowd of onlookers. That was a harrowing tale, the conductor said. Are you all right, my dear? You seem to be sweating. Emily looked down, and sure enough, her palms were wet. I'm fine, she said, unconvincingly. Perhaps you could use a little refreshment. Why don't you come to the dining car and I will get you a drink? Oh, that would be really nice. Everyone is invited, of course, the conductor said, starting towards the door. Chapter 9. Some of the passengers took the conductor up on his offer of a drink and departed for the dining car. The rest settled back to sleep. The car was decorated as ornately as the other cars. 6 tables were set, each prepared for 4 people, and in the corner was a bar made of mahogany that ran half the length of the car. 7 drinks were already set out, 1 at each bar stool. The passengers appeared amazed to find their favorite drinks waiting for them. The 8th passenger sat down in an empty space. She had no desire to drink, but had come along for the walk. Indeed, each of the passengers were glad for an excuse to get up and move a little. The conductor sat quietly in the corner as the passengers enjoyed their drinks and light conversation. Come on, man, asked him. One passenger whispered to the other. No way, he gives me the creeps, man. Whatever secrets he wants to keep, he can keep. He can have as far as I'm concerned.
The conductor, for his part, seemed content to read from an old leather-bound book that had no title. Emily kept an wary eye on him while sipping her ginger ale. Something about him just didn't feel right. The answer was buried in her memory. Somewhere deep, yes, in her memory. Eventually, she would remember. The conductor was watching her in the same way. His silent standoff went totally unnoticed by the other passengers. In the meantime, tongues loosened as the passengers sipped their liquid courage. Pointed questions, better kept to themselves, were asked. So, what's your story? The passenger said to the conductor. Me, said the conductor. You wouldn't find my life very interesting. Why not? He snorted. Everyone else has told you your stories. Why don't you tell yours? The conductor seemed to consider this for a moment. Very well, he said. But don't blame me if you're soon bored to death. I think anything is better than sleeping on a train. So be it. I was born long ago, much longer than any of you. My childhood was quite unspectacular, with the exception of a knack for preserving things, unlike other children who seemed bent on destruction of everything they see. I wanted to keep things. I suppose that's when I first started collecting stories. It was the 12th year of my life when the defining event happened for me, he said, gaze drifting off. What was that? What was that? The straight-laced woman who couldn't find her Bible asked, pulling the conductor to his reverie. Oh, my pet cat died. Well, that must have been horrible, Emily said. You would think so, yes. However, that was not the end of the event, he said. I read a book on taxidermy and used the knowledge to keep my childhood friend with me forever. You stuffed your pet cat? She asked, repulsed. Quite right, he said. I continued to develop my skills practicing on some of the lesser wanted animals around the neighborhood and became quite adept. My efforts were noticed by someone other than law enforcement, and I was offered an apprenticeship in my true calling. Conductor? No, mortician, he said, with a smile that made everyone in the room feel like calling 911. It turned out that the human form is infinitely easier to work with than animals. Really? Oh, yes. And I had so much more room to maneuver. Didn't have to worry about ruining the fur. It was much easier. I was considered to be something of an artist of my profession. I was as happy as I had ever been at that point in my life. If you were so happy, then why did you quit and become a conductor? The straight-laced woman asked. Patience. I shall get to that part of the story. He flashed a mirthless grin. It turned out that there was another mortician in that town who had been quite prosperous until I began my career. It seemed that his work simply could not match up with mine, and he began to lose business. So I did the only thing he could do. Find another job? No, sanction my murder, he said. You see, this man also had a jealous streak along with a very bad temperament. A dangerous combination, you will agree. So what did you do? Nothing. Nothing? That's correct,
I had no idea the sanction was active until a certain gentleman arrived on my doorstep. So a hitman just walked up and rang the doorbell? Essentially, yes. Well, what did you do? The only thing I could do. Run? No, I invited him in for tea, he said. I must say, you people just don't have much of a knack for guessing. They nervously chuckled, each one probably regretting that they had asked for this story, but now felt so involved that they didn't want it to end either. Like any proper host, I invited him in, and we sat down to discuss our dilemma. Unbelievable. What is even more unbelievable was the solution, he said. It seems my guest was getting ready to retire and needed to provide a replacement. See the great care I took of the recently departed, and he offered me the job to me. What about the contract on you? Ah, yes, that was a difficulty. He was sworn to fulfill the contract. This created quite a conundrum for him, but in the end, I provided a solution for him that would suit his needs. So then you became the assassin. Not quite that dramatic. I prefer to call myself a delivery man. Whatever is needed, I deliver. Did the mortician ever find out? Oh, yes. He was one of my first customers. He gave a wicked grin. So what was the solution you provided? The whistle blew its long, mournful note as the train began to slow. Ah, it appears we have arrived, said the conductor. You should all return to your seats. We will be disembarking soon. Chapter 10. One by one, the passengers filed back to their seats. They eagerly gazed through their windows, hoping for a glimpse of their destination, but the only thing they saw was their own reflections. Outside was pitch as black. You wouldn't even be able to tell if the train was moving by looking out the window. Everyone felt the train was slowing down. The normal excitement and anticipation of arriving at their destination was instead replaced by a subtle dread. No one understood why. They all dealt with it in the same way, though. Denial. As they lurched to a stop, the iron beast that had pulled them all this way let out a hiss of steam that sounded like a sigh of relief after a long journey. The conductor appeared in the doorway and announced, "End of the line, please take all your belongings with you." They looked in their seats and in the overhead compartments, but none of them had belongings. Just the clothes on their backs. This struck a few people as odd, but the rest just shrugged it off, and the conductor helped them off the train. "Please watch your step." He directed them down the only visible path. It was made of intricate stonework and lit with an antique gas lamps, but the light didn't extend beyond the path. It was as if they were floating in a sea of darkness. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there came up a large set of beautiful brass doors. Both of the doors were marked "Enter," but neither was marked "Exit." The conductor heaved the massive door open and beckoned the passengers inside, hesitantly followed, and were met with a remarkable sight. The inside of this building was massive. It was Grand Central Station times 10. The ceiling seemed impossibly high and painted to look like the night sky. As Emily stared up, she noticed a painting of the moon. Nothing about that seemed unsettling at first, except the painting was slowly moving across the painted sky. She rubbed her eyes and looked again just to be sure. But the stars seemed to be twinkling. How is this possible? The passengers moved forward, awestruck by the sheer size of the place. As they struggled to take it all in, one of the passengers said, Something's not right here. What is it? Emily said. How many people do you think are in this room? Emily panned across the gigantic room full of people. I don't know, thousands, maybe more. A lot more, I would say. We're talking 100,000 people. What's your point? My point is, you could hear a pin drop in this room. How many times have you seen a crowd this big being quiet? Being this quiet? Well, never, she said softly. Never. Not at all. Yeah, it's like the world's largest funeral home. And there's something else, she said. Look around. What is it that's missing? He scanned the room. I don't know. Everything, she said. There's no ticket counter, no concession stands. I don't even see a restroom. The man looked around and saw that she was right. In fact, all I do is see a line. Where does it even lead? The man called over one of the other passengers that he had spoken with on the train and convinced him to climb up on his shoulders and look around. What do you see? The lower man asked. I don't know. I see people, the upper man said. So many people, it's impossible to count. What else? What else? The upper man strained his eyes to see the other end of the building. I don't know. There's two escalators. One's going up and the other is going down. There's also a man sitting at a desk reading from a huge book. Oh, what's the man wearing? The lower man quietly asked. A white robe. The upper man suddenly held on for dear life as the lower man's knees buckled. What's wrong? What's in this place? The upper man asked, but the lower man seemed to be in shock. Why, this is your destination, the conductor said nonchalantly. Didn't you read your ticket? He directed them to a sign that said, "The end begins here." He directed them to a sign that said, "The end begins here." I wish to thank you all for your stories. Ah, he said, tipping his cap. Then he turned slowly towards the door. Wait, Emily said. Where do I know you from? My dear, he said, with an air of astonishment, haven't you figured that out yet? She paused uncomfortably. Oh, no, please tell me. He turned back and drew close so only she could hear. About 4 months ago, you were a passenger in a very bad automobile accident. I took the driver right from the scene, but you held on to life. You lay in a coma for a month. Several times I came to take you, but you refused to go. You even boarded my train once. Imagine my embarrassment as you disappeared. Having been revived by the doctor, I had quite a bit of explaining to do with that load of passengers. The endless questions I dealt with for the remainder of that trip were something I'd rather forget. Eventually you recovered and I had to wait, but not for long. After I took care of the doctor that snatched you from me, I pursued you covertly and allowed you to see me. As you ran down that path, I extinguished the lights, hoping for the result that I eventually got. So once again, I had the pleasure of having you as a passenger. Only this time there was no one to rescue you. He smiled broadly. She felt no warmth, no comfort from it. All the color drained from Emily's face. She shook all over. So that would mean that you're... Yes, he said. I am. Yes. She recoiled in horror, slowly backing away. I must be off, the conductor said, turning to leave. Oh, what happened to us? The passenger asked. I just transport. That keeps me quite busy nowadays. I don't do the sorting, he said, pausing. But judging by your stories, I would say 2 of you will be going up. They looked at the escalators, then each other. Which 2? One of them said. But the conductor was gone. They looked around, but he had vanished. Off in the distance, they heard a train whistle sound its mournful note. Emily looked down at the ticket. It said Afterlife Express. Oh. The end. Thank you for listening to The Journey by Michael Kelso, read by Jodi E. If you wish to subscribe, please do. It helps the channel out so much. And if you would like, please hit the thumbs up button. And please leave a comment. I'd love to know what you hear about my stories and the readings. But have a great night. Stay safe. Be safe. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.